What happens when a homeowners association pushes the wrong person too far? They fined me, threatened me, and tried to erase my individuality over a fence they called, too gaudy. But instead of breaking, I found their weak spot, and when I bought the only road into the neighborhood, I turned their power against them. One bold move transformed me from their victim into the one person they could never control. When I first bought my ranch, I imagined it as a sanctuary where I could finally express myself without anyone else's rules weighing me down. The land stretched wide, the air was fresh, and for the first time in years, I felt free to create something truly mine. So when it came time to build the fence, I didn't want the usual bland white panels or dull brown planks you see in every other neighborhood. I wanted color, vibrancy, and character. Something that would tell the world that this place was alive. I had artisans carve horse heads into the posts, each painted in bold shades of turquoise and orange. The rails gleamed in sunlight, standing as a proud border for the ranch I had worked so hard to own. To me, it was art. To the QA, it was trouble. It didn't take long for the first letter to arise. The paper was stiff, the wording sharp, and the message unmistakable. Your fence violates community standards. It must be removed or modified immediately. I stared at it in disbelief. I wasn't harming anyone. My fence wasn't unsafe. The only crime I had committed was daring to be different in a place where uniformity was worshipped. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely if I explained the fence's design and showed them the effort and craftsmanship behind it, they'd understand. But when I attended the next HOA meeting, the board members didn't see beauty. They saw rebellion. They called it an eyesore, flashy and inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. Their tone wasn't just about paint and wood. It was about control. They wanted me to comply, to fall in line, to erase the individuality I had poured into my home. As I walked out of that meeting, something inside me shifted. What began as a simple disagreement about style was quickly becoming a battle over freedom. Every time I looked at my fence, I didn't just see wood and color, I saw my independence under attack. And I knew then that this wasn't just the beginning of a dispute. It was the spark of a much bigger war. The letters didn't stop. Every week, a new envelope landed in my mailbox, stamped with the cold, official 8 seal. Each one carried a heavier fine, each one sterner in tone. What began as a violation notice quickly escalated into threats of legal action. They wanted me to cave in, to repaint or tear down the fence that had become my pride. But the more they pressed, the more determined I became. I wasn't about to let a handful of neighbors with clipboards dictate how I lived on land I owned outright. The tension began to ripple through the community. Some neighbors avoided me, afraid of getting caught in the storm. Others whispered their support quietly, too fearful of the board to stand openly with me. I saw it in their eyes, envy for my boldness mixed with fear of retaliation. A few even stopped by under the cover of night to say, "I love your fence, but I can't say that in public." It only confirmed what I suspected. This wasn't just about aesthetics. The HOA thrived on keeping everyone in line, and my refusal to bend threatened their power. Meetings became battlefields. I showed up with pictures, explanations, even legal citations proving I was within my rights. The board countered with vague phrases about a community harmony and a property values. Their arguments weren't rooted in law. They were rooted in ego. They didn't want to lose control, and my fence had become the symbol of their slipping grip. Every raised voice, every dismissive smirk they threw my way only fueled my resolve. Behind the scenes, they tried to wear me down. They piled on fines that reached absurd amounts, hoping the financial strain would force me to fold. They spread rumors painting me as the reckless troublemaker threatening the peace of the neighborhood. But the more they tried to crush me, the clearer it became. This was no longer about a fence. This was about a principle. If I gave in, I wouldn't just lose my fence. I'd lose the freedom to live authentically on my own land. And so I dug in. I stopped seeing the board as neighbors and started seeing them as opponents in a fight for autonomy. What they didn't realize, however, was that their relentless pressure was pushing me toward a discovery that would shift the balance of power entirely. One night, after yet another letter slid into my mailbox demanding compliance, I sat at my desk and decided I'd had enough of playing defense. If the hoe wanted a war, then I would fight it on my terms. I pulled out maps, property records, and legal documents determined to understand exactly how much authority they really had. Everyone assumed that KOA ruled everything inside the neighborhood, but assumptions are dangerous things. Hours turned into days as I combed through dusty county records and online archives. Most of it was the expected nonsense. Bylaws, boundary maps, old permits. But then, buried in a set of land deeds, I saw something that stopped me cold. The main road, the one strip of asphalt every single homeowner relied on to get in and out of the community, wasn't listed under the Highway ownership. In fact, it wasn't theirs at all. It was still marked as a private parcel with a note in the margin that it was available for sale. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. How could an entire neighborhood exist without owning its only road? But the more I double-checked, the clearer it became. The Hohe had built its empire of rules and restrictions on land they didn't fully control. They could send me all the violation letters they wanted, but the moment I set foot on that road record, I realized something life-changing. The power dynamic had shifted. I sat back in my chair and laughed. A deep, victorious laugh I hadn't felt in months. They thought they were boxing me into a corner, but in their arrogance, they had overlooked the foundation under their own feet. That road was their lifeline. Without it, their rules meant nothing. The idea started small. What if I bought it just to protect myself? But the longer I considered it, the more I understood what owning that road would mean. It wasn't just protection, it was leverage. Every fine, every threat, every smug letter they had sent me suddenly seemed ridiculous in the light of this discovery. They thought I was powerless. They thought they had me trapped. But in reality, I had just found the key to their entire kingdom. The day I decided to buy the road felt like the first real victory in a long war. I contacted the county office, confirmed the parcel's status, and reached out to the owner. To my surprise, the deal wasn't complicated. The road had been privately owned for decades by someone who had inherited it and didn't care to maintain it. To them, it was nothing more than a strip of pavement that required occasional upkeep. To me, it was everything. We negotiated quietly. I made sure no word of my plan slipped to the HOA. The last thing I wanted was them scrambling to stop me. When the paperwork finally went through and the deed was signed, I held it in my hands like a weapon forged in fire. The very asphalt their cars rolled across, the path their children rode their bikes on, and the route every delivery truck traveled. It all belonged to me now. It was surreal driving down that road the first time after the purchase. Before, it had just been pavement, something I barely noticed. Now, it was a symbol of control. Every tire that hit the surface was crossing my property. The Hohe didn't even know yet, but the shift in power had already happened. I wasn't the defiant rancher with a gaudy fence anymore. I was the landowner who held the single most important asset in the neighborhood. I kept it quiet at first, savoring the secret. The HOA continued sending their letters, stacking their fines, believing they were grinding me down. I almost pitied them sitting in their board meetings, congratulating themselves for enforcing conformity, completely unaware that I now held the one thing they could never regulate. Their arrogance blinded them, and I wasn't about to enlighten them yet. The satisfaction wasn't just about revenge, it was about principle. They wanted obedience, but I had bought independence. They wanted control, but I had secured freedom. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a road. It was about justice. The harder they had pushed me, the more determined I became to find a way to turn the tables. And now, with that deed in my hand, I was no longer fighting from the shadows. I was preparing to strike back in the boldest way possible. The morning I closed the road, the neighborhood woke up to a shock they would never forget. I had hired workers to set up sturdy gates on both ends of the asphalt and posted bold, unmistakable signs, "A private road, no trespassing." The rumble of drills and the clang of metal echoed through the quiet suburb as curious neighbors peeked from their windows. By the time the sun was fully up, their lifeline was no longer theirs. It was mine, and it was closed. The reaction was instant chaos. Cars lined up, horns blaring, residents demanding answers. The HOA board members arrived in a frenzy, clipboards clutched like shields, trying to assert authority they no longer had. One of them stormed toward me, sputtering threats of legal action, but I simply held up the deed. "This is private property," I said calmly. and it belongs to me. Their faces drained of color as they realized the truth. For all their letters and fines, their rules and arrogance, the power they thought they held had just vanished into thin air. The neighborhood that once judged me now depended on me. Every trip to the grocery store, every commute to work, every school run, all of it passed through land I controlled. I hadn't done this to be cruel. I had done it to prove a point. Freedom has a cost, and so does oppression. They had mocked my fence, treated me like an outsider, and tried to strip me of my right to express myself. But when I shut down that road, I wasn't just blocking pavement. I was shutting down their illusion of power. Some neighbors begged me to reopen it. Others threatened lawsuits. The HOA board scrambled to hold emergency meetings, desperately trying to reclaim authority, but I stood firm. The road was closed, and it would stay closed until they acknowledged the simple truth. They had no right to control me. My fence was never about rebellion for its own sake. It was about individuality, pride, and the freedom to live without bending to pointless conformity. As I watched them argue and panic, I felt an unshakable calm. The battle had begun with a fence, but it ended with a road. They wanted to cage me in. Instead, I had caged them out. And in that moment, I knew I had not only defended my independence, I had redefined it.